Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 190. Now, wait for me to do my little bit of boom attack that I have to do every week. It's mainly caused by YouTube lag. There we go. That one done, I think. Yep. And then I just have to check that. And we're fine. All right, gents. We've got a special guest this evening, John Cavalier, which you can probably tell from his avatar. And John attended the recent reform. He is indeed a special
Very
guest.
recent.
John attended the
only
recent
finished
reform.
a few hours ago.
Yeah, the reform conference. Anyway, so because we are going to speak a bit about Nigel Farage and reform this evening, and we thought because John was there, he'd be a good bloke to ask about it. Okay, so as always on these streams, I'm going to start people off if they want to bring up a particular subject. AI, did you have something particularly you wanted to bring up?
I think probably the reform story will probably conference talk about. The only thing as a sort of side story, I've noticed that the professional academia, as they like to they're referred to, like every time we get round to St. George's Day, and we have the usual St. George was a Turk, so yada yada yada.
Oh God!
And then you have the usual response from a lot of people on our side saying no, he wasn't retard. He was a Cappadocian Greek, and it was several hundred years before the Turkish arrival in Anatolia. Usual back and forth. Well, today one of those very same has now declared that he was a Syrian, an Arab Syrian. So he's gone from Cappadocian Greek to Turk to an Arab Syrian. So that's a new one. Maybe next year we might.
Who said?
It was some. It was some. I will find that because I saw it. I think I saw Carl Benjamin respond to that, and that was sort of taken back because
the guy was a Greek-speaking Roman soldier. I'm sorry, he was.
Someone called David Osland, who is I don't know who he is. I think he's like a journalist or something. He says, what Robert Joke doesn't seem to realize is that the English identity is based on a Middle Eastern religion, the Roman alphabet, Arabic numerals, a Syrian patron saint, and German royal family. So
no, he wasn't a Syrian. I'm sorry. He was a Greek-speaking Roman soldier, and he was a European. It's just not true,
I mean, also like
all that area of what is today Turkey used to be Greek, and in fact, many of them were only moved after World War One. There were still loads of Greeks there until the end of World War One, when the Turks shut them all out.
I mean, also not to put a final point on it, because again, you bring up the whole German royal family stuff. I mean, English people are West Germanics. I mean, we are, assuming because we're all English here, we're all of West Germanic. That doesn't mean we don't have like Brittonic and Celtic heritage mixed in there, but the fundamental English identity and the nature of England, which was what distincts English from, say, the Welsh, the Cornish, Scots, and maybe even in recent history, you might even say the Cumbrian types as well.
Mm-hmm.
It has been that difference between the West Germanic peoples and that make up the English and the Celts and native Brittonics who are the predecessors. I guess you say the predecessors in Roman Britain and beforehand. So that argument doesn't really. I mean, what doesn't really matter. I mean, we're from the same group in that regard. So I don't, the dunk again. But it's just it's another it's just another like liberal lie that it comes out, mainly because most people are so uninformed that they just don't bother. That most of them haven't got the mental capacity to even comprehend a research into such topics. But
I think they're also.
it's
I think they're deliberately dishonest as well. AI. I really do. I think they're deliberately dishonest about that stuff.
I mean, I do think there is an element of like they're looking for rage bait, because this is why I stopped years ago responding to, he was a Cappadocian Greek, he wasn't Turkish, yada yada yada. But I stopped responding to that because I found firsthand when I was responding, when I had this back and forth between this account, there was this one particular halfwit who said because he lived in modern day Turkey, we can refer to him as him being Turkish. And
Well,
I
you
was saying,
can't, because the
no.
Turks lived in Central Asia at the time.
Well, the nation of Turkey is predicated on the existence of a Turkish people in Anatolia, hence why it's called Turkey, because the ethnic identity makes up the nation. The ethnicity of the people is what informs the nation, not the other way around. And that's what I was getting at. He was saying, no, that's not true. And then it went to, what's an English person? And it's and so in the end, I ceased to go back and forth, because you just can't even
I
have a
don't engage
conversation
with
with
those
these
guys,
guys.
man.
No,
I
no, no,
don't
no. I mean,
engage with them. It's not worth it. They're not intellectually honest at all, and there's just no point. All you're doing is wasting valuable time talking to
I
lefties.
do like, I will say that I do like, I think it's Steve Law's response when he says, what was it, whenever it says what's an English person, like what is an English person, you always respond with, it's a person who wasn't protected under the Equalities Act.
Well said.
So I think that's a good one if you want to use that as a response, if you ever come across someone like that.
Did you have anything to add to that, John? You're very familiar with the annual St. George's Day nonsense from the left.
I think it's very easy to get your knickers in a twist over what nobody say on the internet.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Mitch, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there was some guy with that. Was the name of a ginger guy who burnt himself early this year?
The irony is that he'll never be remembered.
I don't know anyone who remembers his name. Yeah, and some guy with that profile pic just spent his time calling Tom Rose, aka Survivor Drive, a bellend or whatever about it. And yeah, that's because Tom Rose, of course, he says English people exist ethnically, like we are West Germanic, as AI would say, we're Anglo-Saxons, etc., etc. And yeah, and Tom Rose has more patience than we do. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, and he's also a very intelligent dude as well, and a good historian, by the way. My only thought on this is that I have said this many times, but I will repeat it because I think it bears repeating. The Celts, the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, the Danes, and even the Normans are all very closely related Western European peoples, Northwest European peoples, all very closely related. And the fact that those people form the English and the British, it's got nothing to do with the kind of mass immigration from assorted third world places that we have had in the last 50 years or so. There's no comparison. Even the French Huguenots, the French Protestants, were again a Northwest European people. So there is no comparison to the completely alien mass immigration that Britain has had over the last 50 or 60 years. Anyway, that's my final thought on that one. Mitch, did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up this week before we move on to our main topic?
I was going to mention the anti-English stuff on Twitter, but in absence of that, do we just want to go into the main topic?
Okay, well, we've only got John for an hour or so, so I think we'll move on to that. So I'll ask him to start us off. What was your impression from the Reform conference that you've just attended?
I thought it was very professional, very slick, very few hitches. I think they conveyed a message that, probably a majority of people on the quote-unquote right can get behind, and I think that's the important takeaway from it. I think, are they the silver bullet answer to all your questions? No, probably not. The very nature of individualism that seems inherent on the right means that they're unlikely to cater to everything you think is right and proper and correct. But if they hit a majority of the points, or if you can see yourself working with them in any way at all, then I think they're worthwhile traveling with for as long as that works for you.
I've only got one question, John, really, because I have supported reform, and I do support reform, and Nigel Farage in particular. But I will do so only so long as he sticks to this. We must stop mass immigration into Britain, both illegal and legal. Is he still sticking to that? Because that's my one thing.
As far as I understand, and as far as they conveyed at the conference, it's still their intention to pursue a quote unquote net zero policy when it comes to immigration. And I understand that does not go as far as some people would like, especially the Steve Laws of the world and so on. But it's a hell of a lot better than 750,000 net.
Yeah, 100%, totally agree with you. And also, I mean, I do think that remigration is inevitable, but there's no way we can get that unless we stop the mass immigration first.
We didn't go from 10,000 net to 750,000 net literally overnight. It took 30 to 50 years. And, if it took 30 to 50 years to get back to the same position, I mean, it wouldn't be great. But I think expecting to go from 750,000 net to let's remigrate 10 million people, many of whom were born here or even their parents were born here overnight, I think you're frankly deluded.
Yeah, no, I don't think you can do that either. I think it's an essential first step to stop mass immigration before you can try and reverse it.
I mean,
if you can't stop it, there's no point in deporting people when you're still letting loads of people in. There's no purpose in that.
I mean, the initial practical way is, and I can speak from my experience, is a lot of companies run scholarship programs or contract-based programs and NHS and everything, where they get the foreign workers. But it's not just in the health sector; it's other sectors as well.
I don't see what you're you're effectively talking about what would in a previous time be referred to as a guest worker who wouldn't have the same rights, and they wouldn't be a citizen and therefore wouldn't have the same rights that would be conveyed to citizens. And I think it's entirely rational to operate a guest worker system to fill short-term gaps in your economy if need be, while you work on how you train your own citizens to do that. I don't have a problem with that at all. What's his surname? The guy that's Who Dares Wins. Is it Middleton? Ant Middleton? He gave a really good talk, and he talked about how he'd been approached by Farage and co to sort of get him to teach them how he would train a new recruit. And he talks about how they come into his camp, the camp gates are locked, the only people that can come into his camp are people that add value or are on message and so on. And I think that's a more call it a stepping stone if you want. I think that's a much more rational position to take in the short to medium term.
I think what I was getting at, John, was my idea is like there are ways I mean, obviously you're not going to be rounding up people and shipping them on boats and planes, en masse or anything. That's not going to happen.
I mean,
it's not feasible.
It might do. It's happened in other countries, but I
have used the exact.
You'd start off with voluntary stuff, wouldn't you? You'd start off with voluntary.
Well, I was
possibly
thinking more like
financially assisted remigration, for example.
I mean, I was
if you
thinking
stop
like
preferencing certain groups, you effectively create the situation in which many of the people that came here when there was a preference for those groups no longer have any incentive to be here, and therefore it may become in their best interest to choose to effectively voluntarily remigrate. And that's if that's what they want to do, then fine. If not having political favor, institutional favor on their side means they don't want to be here anymore, then by all means leave.
Well, yeah, that's what I was getting at. Is stopping sending money over. So they, one idea was of preventing money being sent abroad to back to their families and their home countries as one means, because that's one incentive gone.
I mean, that's not what reform. I mean, I don't know that they have too much in the way of concrete policy in that area. I simply know that, in I think the most recent interview I've seen of Farage, which was with Eddington. Is it Steve Eddington?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He upset, of course, all of the white wing by saying out of context, by saying that he wasn't in favor of effectively deportations or what have you. I mean, in context, what he's saying is it's not really exactly what we've said here today, which is that it's not really politically viable.
Yeah,
so there's not a lot of point talking about it at the moment.
The main problem with Steve Laws and guys like that have not got any pragmatism regarding someone like Farage. They just want us to go from.
But what Farage did say what Farage did say is that you need to close the borders.
Yeah, and as long as he sticks to that, he'll have my support. So long as he sticks to that, he'll have my support. Because you have to do that first.
People cry about the fact he's not said, we need to, ethnically cleanse the UK and return back to, Anglo-Saxon roots or whatever. But, he's the only politician advocating. He's certainly the only political leader advocating for any kind of material restriction on migration. Even the Conservative Party candidates who are desperately fighting for the leadership of that party seem to be quite happy to trot out the 14-year tried and true tens of thousands line.
Don't think it will work. I think people have had enough of that. I really do.
Well, what I met today more than anything was disaffected Conservative voters, many of whom have been sort of lifelong 30+ year Conservative voters, members, and they're done. They're just done.
Yeah. No, I think that's good.
I can't foresee a reason why any of the people I spoke to today would ever go back.
The only thing I would say to Farage and reform is that the immigration thing we're talking about and the topic at hand. I mean, it's a problem. It's going to be a continuous problem going forward for many years to come. It will dominate most likely the next general election as well, in some capacity. And I hope Farage is not consumed by it in the sense that it becomes toxic in the sense that he's able to formulate a policy which can unite people around him.
Let me read you the objectives. I think the key objectives that were in their constitution, which was voted on today, although not. I'm a member of various associations and so on, and I don't think it would pass for a vote. in any of them, but notionally it was voted on today. The objectives 2.4: the party believes the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland hereinafter the United Kingdom should only be governed by her own citizens, and that its governance shall at all times be conducted first and foremost in the interests of the United Kingdom and its peoples, and that the only laws that should apply within the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom are those wholly made by the Parliament of the United Kingdom. The party further believes that the integrity of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, hereinafter the United Kingdom, should be maintained. And then 2.5, in pursuit of these objectives, the party will at all times adhere to the principle of full equality before the law. The party shall conduct itself and its affairs in a way that it does not discriminate against or in favour of any person on the grounds of their race, religion, gender, ethnic origin, education, beliefs, sexual orientation, class, social status, sectarianism, or any other basis prescribed by law. Further, the party shall at all times adhere to the principles of the rule of law, liberty, democracy, and respect for the human rights and the essential traditional freedoms of the people of the United Kingdom and those under the protection of the United Kingdom.
Seems pretty reasonable.
I think it's a reasonable set of objectives that's likely to attract many of the right people. I think they're rational and they're not ideologically crippling.
Yeah, no, look, and they're a pretty radical departure from what's actually happening at the moment. Let's be honest, they are.
Yeah, But, I mean, the current crop of parties do believe that you should discriminate in favour of a person on the grounds of their race, religion, gender, ethnic origin, education, belief, sexual orientation, class, social status, sectarianism, or any other basis, simply on the basis that they think that those classes are marginalised in some way.
Happy Cursed Plague Doctor in the chat is asking, John, and you might know the answer to this, is reform in favour of defunding the BBC? In other words, getting rid of the licence fee?
Lee Anderson ripped up his TV licence begging letter on stage at the conference, so I think it's fair to say that at least one of the 5 MPs is very much in favour of defunding the BBC, whether it as an individual or as a collective.
Well, I think all of us would agree with that. Adam, you've just joined us, mate.
For 10 years. So.
I'm sorry, John. I just want to get Arman's thoughts on what you've said so far. What do you think, Arman?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a Reform Party member, obviously, and I joined specifically just to see if on the inside it was just disaffected former Tories, and I mean that's what I saw locally. And I as you say, that is kind of the party as a whole. I was actually, because I was at work today and I was quite bored, and I was looking through 2024 election data, and I was looking for something else, and then I ended up looking through like constituency voting stats specifically, and I found that like of people that voted Tory in 2019, only half of them, I think it was 53% to be exact, voted Tory in 2024. Obviously Labour lost voters as well, we all kind of know that, but they Reform hoovered up a little over a quarter of all those Tory voters, of the total Tory voters from 2019, and half of the ones that obviously didn't come out for this election.
I don't know if the point's ever been made on this channel. When you look at the statistics comparing 2019 versus 2024, me and Tory Rebuttal, also in the Worcester Club, we started looking into the data, and we kind of noticed that effectively, when you're talking about the Conservative Party having a lot of sort of quiet quitters, actually, if you look at the data, a significant majority of those people who simply didn't turn up to vote are actually probably OAPs that are now dead.
Yeah,
it's like 80% of the. I mean, I'm pulling a number out of the air there. I can't remember what we looked at, but it's a significant majority that are simply not been replenished by younger people turning Tory as they age, kind of thing. It's not.
Yeah.
A lot of them are people that just sat at home on their hands. They are people who are no longer with us.
Yeah.
When I was in my local Tory association, the average age, because I had a list of all members in the association, and for like this was when campaigning purposes, and the average age I think was about 72.
Whoa. Whoa.
And this was
And
this was a few years ago.
I imagine I imagine probably that is fairly representative of reform as a whole. What I found refreshing at the conference over the last 2 days was that whilst yes, there is a sea of sort of grey-haired keyboard warriors there, there's also quite a lot of younger people. I spoke to a number of them who'd come up from sort of London and so on, and their big concern prior to this weekend had been sort of being associated, being sort of visually associated with reform, in the sense that they're all worried about what their employers might think. And obviously a pensioner has far more ability to be politically active, because he's not worried about his employer going, you're bringing our company into disrepute or whatever. But a lot of young people are just saying, you know what, stuff it. It's worth the risk.
John, could I ask you a question? And this is something that I think is quite important for reform. Like, Nigel Farage has an actual record of getting traditional working class people to come out and vote. That's how the Brexit vote was won. Yeah, that's how the Brexit vote was won. I think that, given the direction that two-tier care is taking the Labour Party, that there is a lot of potential traditional white working class support for reform as well. I mean, would you agree with that?
I'm not their spokesman, but they certainly have said that. I think they came second to Labour in something like 97 seats, and those are the seats they're targeting primarily in going into the next election. Their intent. I mean, Farage just said it himself. But Labour, we are coming for you.
We talked a while ago.
Farage can get those people. Sorry, Alan, carry on, man.
I was just going to say, I mean, Mitch made this point a while back, where he looked at, I mean, I can't remember the exact statistics, but like in Labour's first election, they got 2 or 3 seats, and by their second election, they had, put that up, sort of like 50-fold, essentially. That does seem to be. I mean, this is like I know that the reform guys, some of the top guys, occasionally will talk about like wanting to move to proportional representation. I think they as much say that because they're just highlighting, I think like a criticism of the government.
I was talking to people about that today, and some of them are in favour of it, many of them aren't. And I said, look, any political party that, once it's achieved power under first past the post, then continues to advocate for proportional representation is just suicidal.
Yeah, and because one of the things that it kind of leads to, like the first past the post system, is momentum, which is also why sometimes I think when people criticize what Farage says,
they don't understand how to play the game, and he does, and that's why you have to give him a bit of leeway.
Yeah, and it's like, it almost doesn't matter what he says in the moment. It's about the way you move it. He talks about the net zero policy. And as well, like, because Duke, you brought up about legal immigration earlier. He has consistently talked about legal immigration a lot.
Yes, he has.
And people seem to forget that quite often. But if you get to the point where you can actually enact a net zero policy, you've had to sort of, I suppose, hollow out and then retrain and rebuild things like the civil service from the bottom up so extensively that from that point on, anything is possible, where previously it probably wasn't. So
I mean,
that's entirely my view, Adam. Yeah.
I say, so to build upon Adam's point, the TV debates back in the general election, Farage was actually one, because usually when you talk about the arguments of legal migration, it usually bogs down to the effect on the economy. Farage was one of the few. I mean, I think he was the only candidate, candidate in the election who actually talked about the social cohesion and the problem of
Well,
there is a lack of integration.
Bear in mind as well that at the conference he had Matt Goodwin, who based part of his talk around the fact that certainly the immigration we've seen over the last 10 years, in particular, has had absolutely no financial benefit and is actually even a net drain. I think it was if they live up to 70, it's something like a £500,000 net drain per each individual. If they live to 80 or 90, it was then a 750,000. Then if they live to 100, it's a £1 million drain over the lifetime of that individual on the state for each and every individual that's come into the country on the basis of low skilled labor. And so I think while historically we've had to rely on the argument that immigration is culturally damaging, I think now even the kind of, oh yes, but look at what a financial benefit it offers, I think even that argument's now falling flat on its face, particularly because they've started letting in, well, Boris Johnson basically, when given a chance to pursue a points-based immigration system like Australia has or had, elected to pursue one where the bar was set too low.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think, cause I can't remember, because this was the video that he filmed, that Goodwin filmed down at Dover, wasn't it?
No, so Matt Goodwin was actually at the conference.
Right, okay. Because then I saw he was talking about this as well on a YouTube on a Twitter video
I think he
put up.
Did he release that maybe the day? Was that yesterday or this morning?
I think so. Yeah, very recently, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's probably done that to coincide. So he's yeah.
But I mean, even the OBR report that I think those figures come from, although I know he does produce a lot of his own figures that are quite good.
Mm-hmm.
That OBR report makes several assumptions that kind of weight it in in favor of migration. So to be honest, if we ever get to the bottom of the real statistic, it's probably even worse.
Well, the point he made today is that you won't get to the bottom of the real statistics because many of these government organizations are now, whilst we're being told that everything we talk about is misinformation, they're actively removing the information that might have enabled people to make a reasoned decision. He mentioned a number of statistics. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but one of them in particular was, who is guilty of crime, who is committing the crime, what is their ethnicity, where are they from. They're trying to get rid of that information. They're trying to brush it under the carpet. They're trying to get rid of even the census.
Yeah.
I wonder why. I wonder why, John.
It was statistics on around ethnicity and effectively benefits. They want to sweep all this under the rug. You cannot get the data, and yet when you try and comment on the fact that it seems to be the case, like in London, where I think it's up to 50% of the council houses go to foreign-born nationals, they want to make it impossible for you even to know that. So how you can possibly talk authoritatively on the subject when the people that are meant to be collecting the data refuse to do so?
Yeah, I saw the report where they specifically cited that they'd reached out to some sort of NGO lawyer group who had essentially said to them that you shouldn't capture the stats because they can be used by the far right to sow division, which obviously tells you that the statistics aren't good.
Damning.
Yeah,
they're totally damning.
But John, what is your opinion on Matt Goodwin? Because I mean, I know that I see that Harrian's quite defensive of him, and I've seen a lot of work that he's put out which I quite liked, and a friend of mine read his book and he was really quite big on it. I remember he did that debate against the Novara Media man with Konstantin Kissin and that other lady, and he came off. He did some really good stuff on there, but there was obviously some reports that he's done back in the day where he's kind of laid out a strategy for essentially folding dissension back in to the mainstream. And I know that the people that sort of pushed that back in the day are not particularly popular, but I do still think it's quite a damning thing to worry about. And as much as I want to,
he's not a politician. He's a statistician. And I think you listen to him as far as it's relevant. You go with it as far as it's worth going with as far as you're concerned. You know, the stats he puts out are as far as anyone can tell, correct. They paint a picture that says that we're not in the minority. This was a point he was making today. Actually, you're not in a 10% minority or a 14% minority. It's in fact 60 to 80% of the population that feel the same way Reform voters do on a number of the key issues, you know, around immigration and so on. And so I think that's important, and I think we should use that. If elsewhere he says we should do something that we don't like, well, we don't have to do it.
I mean, yeah, I mean, the thing is that sorry, Mitch, you go on.
I was gonna say, I suppose like the main problem with another problem with Reform was they didn't really they say like in opposition to things rather than saying, oh yeah, this is our positive vision. Like at least I mean, some people might take the mick out of the Anglo-futurism meme, but I suppose that's where, you know, there's actually like a positive future for something. Let's say we invest in Rolls-Royce nuclear reactors or whatever. Whereas the Reform is just looking like they just oppose mass migration, we oppose this. But it's more.
I think you have to bear in mind they're a small party, and small parties. I think if you try and focus on too broad a suite of issues, you dilute your message and you end up tripping yourselves up. I think that will come as it grows. You know, you want specific answers to specific problems. I think, obviously, particularly when they go into the next election where they're claiming they want to even, you know, make Farage PM, they're going to have to, over the space of the next 5 years, really flesh that out. But I think it's too early at 5 MPs and I think maybe 20 to 40 local councillors. I think give it 2 to 3 years and you'll have a much more comprehensive list. I mean, essentially, if you really want to kind of, their ideology is kind of Spitfire nationalism. And that's the kind of vision for the future. It's patriotic, flag-waving people who love their country and want to put their hand in and do some work.
Yeah, because I just thought that you'd have a more positive vision. Because I mean, you got to think there's the local elections coming next year, and you can imagine the Tories are going to lose big with Reform, possibly.
I think Labour are going to lose big as well. The by-election or the handful of local elections that we have had have been absolutely damning for Labour, I think.
And all they do is
Labour are definitely not popular. Let's be honest about this.
No,
like,
I think
the British people hate Labour at the moment.
This is, I don't know if this point's been made on here either, but if you look at total eligible voting population, it's 20% that voted for Labour, and of that 20%, apparently a quarter of them already effectively regret their decision.
Yeah, no, we did. We actually did make that point, John, but quite strongly just after the election. Mitch did for a start.
15% of the voting public support Labour at this moment in time.
Yeah, they're not popular. I mean, they won because the Conservatives had betrayed people so much that no one was willing to support them. And well, I think another thing that we've got to say is that if Farage had not run at the last general election, immigration wouldn't have hardly been mentioned by any of the major parties. Otherwise, it just wouldn't.
I made this point afterwards, where it was right after the election, where I said there's only one government that's actually won on such a small minority of votes, a majority out of it, and that was a government back in, I think, 1928. But I looked a bit too soon because they hadn't quite finished the count, and once they added the last 150,000 to it, I looked again, and it was that election from 1928, and I think Tony Blair's last election. That was the only; those were the only two times where parties won on less votes.
I mean, Jeremy Corbyn had more public support than
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
I mean, I think also one problem, and I think this is why today Farage and Lee Anderson and all the Reform people I've seen on TV and elsewhere sort of been saying we now need to build up a local base, and really hit in the go out in the local community and basically copy the Liberal Democrat model, which is something I've said, John, a couple times on this stream in the last few months, which because I see because I live in the West Country, so I see how competent Liberal Democrats are at targeting specific seats, especially their old sort of seats they got back in the day and were able to take away from the Conservatives. And in my particular constituency, it was unique in the sense it was effectively a three-way split, where the Conservatives won, Labour came second, and they also were joined by a Reform. And the unfortunate thing is, I like, as one example is one, but I think it's probably there's other instances where this would be the case. Where one of my had a gardener, and he said, oh, he didn't bother voting, but he would have voted Reform, but he didn't bother voting because he knew Reform wouldn't win here. And so I think if there is a visual representation on even on the local government level that Reform can win and win councillors in areas, it sort of dispels that myth that they can't win,
Yeah,
and
so
it pushes Reform.
I mean, next year in May, I think, is one of the smaller sets of local government elections. So it's not the one where the majority of the country is having local elections, but it is a it's 2,000 local council positions, and Reform, as far as I understand, intend to stand 2,000 candidates, and they intend to win a significant chunk of those. I mean, whether it's a majority, I doubt it, but if it's a couple of hundred, that's going to start to send messages that it's more than just a flash in the pan, and there's some momentum there.
Yeah, I was just going to add like my response. So like in my neck of the woods in West Midlands, I remember like the last local elections, Reform averaged something like 27% of the vote in each council ward. Now, if you believe in vanguardism as a concept, then that's pretty much assures victory in a sense, because you've got Tories and Labour being unpopular, and you got 27% already voted for you as an outsider candidate. So I reckon Reform might win big in the council elections in the next few years to come.
And people have always been willing to make a more risky vote when it comes to local elections.
Yeah,
this is why you end up with lots of BNP local candidates, and lots of Green councillors, and lots of random no-name party councillors that no one would vote for in a general election, but they're willing to give them a shot for the locals.
Absolutely right, John. One thing I wanted to ask you about was I listened to Nigel Farage's keynote speech at the conference.
Was that the one from Friday? Or so I assume
the one you put on YouTube, and I wasn't very impressed with it, to be honest. But then I thought about it afterwards, and I came to the conclusion it was mostly aimed at the mainstream media, at the MSM, in order to stop them from trying to corner Reform into being a far right party.
Whatever his actual ideology, he's got to play a very careful game, because the mainstream media
100%
could very easily throttle it before it even gets, that's
what I wanted to ask you about.
One of today's speakers was, I think he was a Finnish politician, Timo. Let me find it.
Timo Soini, True Finns Party.
So he was a member of a political party in Finland which went basically bankrupt, and he'd worked for his whole life, and he had to start from scratch. And he described its day as four Finnish guys in a sauna, sort of trying to figure out what they could do. And now they're I think they're the largest right-wing party in Finland, and he's now got sort of senior position within the Finnish government and so on. And his point was, look, don't as individuals representing Reform, and as MPs and whatever, don't say stupid things that's going to cost you long term because you want some kind of short term, I have to be right in the short term, because it's you strangle yourself before you even start.
You basically don't behave like a schizo. in public.
The media want you to say stupid things. They're waiting for you to say stupid things. So just don't say stupid things that you don't need to say.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, exactly. It's the same thing with like Lawrence Fox and Calvin Robertson to some extent. The reason why they were booted off GB News, and I mean, you cannot say the rights or the wrongs of it, but at the end of the day, it was a silly thing to say. Stuff like I forgot even what they said.
When Farage saying, I think on balance we should close the borders. I think that's virtually a verbatim quote from the Edgington interview he did. To then attack him because he doesn't want to comment on the ethnicity questions. Well, what's the relevance of closing the borders if you don't have any kind of interest in the ethnicity question?
100%. Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, and to be honest, I think
some things you don't need to say.
If you go through plenty of like clips and interviews of Farage throughout his career, you can sort of get you can get a feeling of I mean that it's obvious that there's stuff that he cannot just openly say. I mean, he had the problem during the election where he kind of wasted a bit of political capital talking about Ukraine and Russia and saying Russia started, and whether, and I know people on the panel here have views on it, and yet the thing there is, it doesn't really matter who started what or when. Number one, at the end of the day, it doesn't really have much of a bearing on what happens in this country. And I think with hindsight, he probably shouldn't have made that comment on the basis, if I was advising him, on the basis that it did give like types in the media as like
it gives them something to talk about, and it puts a target on your back, and it's just not necessary. Yeah. I think he's learned a lot from UKIP, and he's still learning. But I think he's quite smart.
I think actually, though, John, Nigel Farage saying that actually quite impressed me, because I don't think most young British men want to be conscripted to fight a war we can't win against Russia.
No, I agree.
And Nigel Farage's take was one of the most realistic mainstream takes I've seen on that war.
That's a window in that says that in many ways he's on the same or similar page to us, but he just, he's not hiding behind an anonymous avatar as all five of us are here. He's got his face in the mainstream. He's trying to build a political party, and the toughest thing for him at the moment is he is essentially at the place he was with UKIP. He's got around 14%, 15% of the vote. He's got, which it translates to around 4 million voters, and that's broadly where UKIP were before it all went wrong. And I think he's now got to, I think they want to go down the Lib Dem route where they take their 4 million and they're more strategic with that and get more seats, but also he'll want to grow that on from 4 million as well. And that's the challenge that he has now. He's not done that before.
No. Yeah, and I don't think he'll walk away this time. Do you?
Well, no. He's locked in for 5 years. So I read the Constitution quite thoroughly before voting on it today. And if you look into all the clauses around leadership, voting on the Constitution today cements him as the leader for the next 5 years. There's also clauses in there around, and it's quite woolly, and I think intentionally, imminent general elections would mean that the leader could effectively unilaterally extend his term by 5 years. So effectively, we've got 5 to 10 years of Farage guaranteed.
Good.
The provisions for removing the leader are such that one is currently not relevant because you'd have to have 100 MPs in Parliament for 50 of them to have a vote of no confidence in him. And the other one is 50% of the membership have to, they have their signatures have to be collected. And good luck getting 40,000 signatures. Yeah. So
that's not going to happen. I have to ask you this, John, because I know people like Mitch, etc., are quite keen on Ben Habib. What's your view on that?
I like Ben Habib, but what I will say is there were two people actually who were sidelined by what happened when they became MPs, and one of them was Dr. David Bull, and the other one was Ben Habib. And Dr. David Bull was at the conference presenting, introducing everyone, playing his part, and Ben Habib was just slagging everyone off before the conference happened. So I think you have to understand your position. Ben Habib has got, I would say he's got fairly low capital as compared to some of the other people in the party. I get that his nose got put out of joint, but this is a reality of political life between men, and you have to know your place. And I don't think he knows his place, unfortunately.
I think one of the main problems though was you had that Zia Yusuf fellow who became chairman when no one had even heard of him before.
Yeah, Zia Yusuf donated it. I mean, Farage wants to put in place a team that can deliver. If Zia Yusuf can do with the party what he's done with business, then, you know, in 5 years' time, it's going to be a very different machine, and it's going to be very well run and very well connected and very well financed, and it's going to win elections. Whereas Ben Habib is a nice guy, but he brings none of those things.
I thought Ben Habib was the same successful businessman in the same sense as Zia Yusuf was.
I don't think it's to the same degree. I mean, Zia Yusuf is a self-made billionaire, and he's not the self-made billionaire that Elon Musk is, where he took an immense wealth from his father. As I understand it, his mum and dad are kind of doctors in the NHS. So whilst they might have been relatively well off compared to the general population, they're not bankrolling him to the tune of, you know, £100 million or whatever.
But he isn't English.
What's John? Is Claire Fox? Because I know you had like back before Farage took helm, you did have like when it was the Brexit Party, like a little contingent of
I didn't follow it when
communists.
It was the Brexit Party because I was I was a UKIPper.
Okay, but was Claire Fox or any like those sorts of people present at the
certainly not speaking.
conference?
They might have been in the audience. I wouldn't know them well enough to say they were. To be honest, to be honest, the only woman that spoke there was Anne Widdecombe, who I think is very good.
Yeah, she's fine. She's fine. She's a very old style Tory. Yeah.
All the other women there were sort of wives and daughters.
Yeah.
I must bring up what Alman said, though, John. The thing about Zia Yusuf is he's not an English or British man, really.
I mean, this is where I'm going to annoy some people. For whatever reason, whether you agree with it or not, he is a British citizen, and I subscribe to Enoch Powell's view, which says that you treat all British citizens equally. That was the message he delivered with the Holocamp speech. It doesn't matter where they are or where they come from. If they're a British citizen, you treat them equally under the law, and that is the constitution of the Reform Party as now voted on. They're not interested, according to the constitution, about preferencing you or depreferencing you as a British citizen based on your skin colour. And so
I do get that, but I think also what Alman said about him not being an actual English or British man is there is some truth to that.
Well, nor's Ben Habib by that metric, and that was how we started the conversation.
Yeah, fair enough. Adaman, what's your thoughts on that, mate?
I don't know.
I know it's not going to please everyone.
I mean, it's not. I don't really have a massive, but like the thing with the whole treat everyone equally under the law thing is, well, it's not really a way to get around it, is it? Like ultimately, I want a state that actually has white British privilege, but that's something that you enforce at the border, by just not allowing enormous swathes of people that create, bilateral communities that dishevel your own, or unroot your own, I should say. And that's a different thing to saying two people standing before a judge will be judged for the crimes they've committed under different things, under different standards.
Which they are today.
Which
they are today. Someone can make a tweet on someone can do a tweet on Twitter or something on Facebook, and they'll go to jail for 24 months.
But this is kind of the other problem as well, is that
and you don't go to prison.
To an extent, there will be a lot of people that will kind of listen to like a person of the right, like Farage, say, oh, we don't care about skin color, we just see people equally. And they kind of hear it in the same way that they hear like the boomer saying reverse racism. Like they kind of scoff and roll their eyes. But and that's not really a criticism, because I don't really know how you'd handle that any differently.
I think the trouble is what happened. I think what happened this month is, of course, you had that debate. All these people who did attack Farage and what about him not caring about skin color and all that, and the demographics of it, were also the same people who were quite active in that Steve Laws and Lawrence Fox debate. And Lawrence Fox basically said, given a hypothetical,
Lawrence Fox had the floor wiped with him. Steve Laws was all over him. I think Steve Laws' position is not an easy sell, given I think most people probably think it's not politically viable, and not necessarily because they disagree with it, but just because they think not enough people would agree with it. And the reality the reality of deporting people, many of whom may actually, you will have made friendship bonds. I mean, I break bread with and go to church with many people every week who are really, really nice people, but under Steve Law's 0.7, they would all be kicked out. And I'm not sure I wholly agree with that.
I mean, that's okay. You can evangelicalize the white liberals, John. Go out and evangelicalize the white liberals in your area.
But
I would just say this, that if you're going to, I do support eventual remigration, I do, but I think you've got to do it gradually. First of all, you have to close the borders, which is why I support Farage and reform, because don't close the borders, anything else is a waste of time. So you've got to close the borders, first of all. After that, you should de-incentivize people to arrive. So there should be rules in place.
The disincentives to begin with.
So they don't get, as John said earlier, they don't get all the rights of a British citizen just because they're coming over as a guest worker.
The first port of call is that they don't get preferential treatment.
Absolutely.
That would be a great start.
I mean, I think that goes without saying. But after that, then people coming over as a guest worker who shouldn't, I don't think, be allowed to bring their families with them, shouldn't get the full rights of a British citizen in terms of benefits and this kind of stuff. And then you should incentivize people to leave voluntarily, possibly by giving them financial incentives to do so. I'm not against giving people 20,000 or 25,000 quid to bugger off back to where they came from. And only after that do you have to possibly do forced repatriations. I think that's quite a long way down the road, to be honest.
Well, as I say, if Ted Heath had tried to flood the country with 750,000 net, given how incensed the people were then about, literally 10,000 net or even 10,000 gross, it wouldn't have happened. There's no way he could have got away with that, I think. And it's taken, best part of over half a century, in fact, to get us to the point where the British public are essentially willing to let an invasion happen every year. And I think, short of violent uprising, which I think we've seen that Labour are literally willing to release, violent predators and so on in order to jail people who are just fed up with what's happening to their country. So short of that armed revolution, it's going to be a slow, I would say, a sort of slow backtrack.
Yeah,
but you have to be there. I mean, you'd have to be there to keep pushing, because I think once Reform, if they ever were to become the ruling party, once they've delivered on net zero, the next thing, if you want more, is to push them to deliver more. Because if they deliver net zero and everyone seems happy, then they'll stick with that.
Yeah, no,
I mean, the most political.
That's how politics works. That's how politics works.
Well, yeah, I mean, but you see, because the most obvious thing is Reform to go after Labour, but Labour's client voting group, and the only reason why that there is, the Labour is obviously so in favour of mass immigration is one part of it, these are the demographics that vote for them en masse in areas.
Why do you explain why the Conservatives, knowing that these importees are allegedly Labour supporters, why do you think they increased and exacerbated that? Because that is suicide.
Yeah, John. I mean, I don't. I mean,
I think
don't.
the
I don't
last
believe.
election we saw that, didn't we?
Yeah.
Didn't we see it? The last election, it was
sorry, Andrew. Hold on. Let me just answer John's question there. I mean, I don't believe that there is a functioning difference even before then between the Conservative and Labour on any meaningful level in that regard. Sure, there were Conservative MPs who were against it in principle, but if you look at the way,
the incentives for the Conservative Party, given that hundreds of them lost their seat at the trough, surely the incentive for the Conservative Party as a whole is to actually be opposed to net migration. So
you would think so. You would think. I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, all obvious indicators should be the Conservative Party is against this, but many Conservative MPs willingly went into this election with the attitude of we're going to lose our seats, even betting they were going to lose their seats. Everything about it was so bizarre. And I think, not going into the whole democracy is fake and everything, but it does somewhat point in that direction that there was already predetermined that Labour were going to be the next government, and that the election didn't matter. It only mattered when Farage came back and changed the dynamics of it.
Yep. No, I think there's some truth there. I think that's a good point. Mitch and Atman, what's your thinking on what we're talking about at the moment?
I mean, I'm supporting Reform because I've got a more pragmatic mindset. But obviously, the thing is, with Steve Laws and Zuma historian and a lot of these other persons, I can like some of the stuff they say, but I mean, they lack that pragmatism. Like, they just think we can go from what we got now, like this gay race communism, whatever you want to call it, to all of a sudden based on ethnic state, chucking every brain.
And I will say, virtually every talk made sure to have a dig at the gay race communism today and yesterday, in fact. That's and I think some of the biggest cheers were in relation to them talking about, particularly Lee Anderson's talk, talking about just how utterly ridiculous the world is in relation to rainbow lanyards and teaching children that they can transition and so on.
Fan world, yeah. Adam, what's your thinking on what we're talking about at the moment?
I'm going to say I'm a little more on the defense of Steve Laws, because while I actually fully agree with what Mitch has just said, but I just think Steve Laws is doing the task that's been ordained to him, doing that particular role, which is
I like Steve Laws.
Cycling.
I like Steve Laws. I follow him on Twitter. I quite often retweet him. But Yeah, I totally agree with you, but I also agree with what Adman said as well.
But
So
he is cycling people on the fringes in a way that, in his own small way, is moving the Overton window. I know people hate that term.
I don't disagree. I just yeah.
I mean, the thing is,
I've
ultimately,
watched,
I know that you John said that you don't follow the 7 stages all the way to the end, and that's fine, obviously. But
I think most people are fairly happy with the first at least 3 or 4.
Yeah, 3 or 4 is probably a good. Yeah, I'd imagine. I forget which one 4 is. Is that's past deport foreign criminals, isn't it? Just past, I think. Yeah, something like that. But anyway, like the thing is ultimately it still benefits us massively to have this in conversation that's going on. I do sometimes worry because obviously we've had the whole thing where Twitter's been taken over and it's now become like a real conversation space for us where it previously wasn't. I do sometimes worry that if we push them too hard, they will find an alternative and like the shitlibs generally will just leave and then we'll be left in an echo chamber again. But I also think they're too addicted to it, so they kind of can't leave. They're trapped in there with us.
It brings me no great joy to comment on people who claim to be leaving Twitter and just say, "Oh well, I see your profile's still active."
Yeah, I mean, you did actually back in the day leave Twitter, didn't you? You went to I forget the platform.
Did I ever? I've
John,
come and
I
gone
think
with Twitter. I fall out in and out.
Yeah.
I think I remember. Did you join Parler when that was a thing back in the day?
I may have done.
Yeah, I think you set like a hard date, didn't you? And you said, "I'm leaving Twitter on this date to go to Parler," and you did stay away for a long time.
Technically, I don't have a Twitter account of my own currently.
Right.
I've got to say, I've just got to say that, yeah, look, Twitter is too big for all these lefties to leave. They can't, because if they do, they become irrelevant. I mean, this is the thing. I've joined a lot of alternative social media things, like I'm on Minds, and I'm on, what's it called, Gab. Gab I've been on for years, and I think I've got about 60 followers on there, you know. I didn't join Twitter until last year, I think.
What I would say
I joined it a lot earlier, but never used it, and I've only used it for like 18 months, and I've got like 900 people on Twitter who follow me. So I mean, you know,
what I would say is that the 2 days I've been at the Reform Conference has probably done more in terms of networking than 2 years on Twitter has.
Yeah,
if I'm being brutally honest.
Yeah, I mean, because I'd say I'll probably join Reform by the end of the year for certain.
There are, I think, 4 regional conferences, 1-day conferences that they're planning before the end of the year. I think Wales is the 7th. You can see it on their website. That one's live, and I would highly recommend that if you're interested at all and you happen to be in one of these regions, to get in contact and get a ticket and go along and just see what it's about and maybe ask a question or two if you get the opportunity to do so.
I'm planning on going to the West Country one, so if people are around, you might meet me in real life. I'll have my my cloak and my mask with me, so I'll be lurking in the corner.
I mean, I'm going to the Homeland Party conference next week. There was something else a week after that, but I'm going in to have surgery on my leg, so I won't be able to. So I'll have to see what sort of dates are up there.
We've got all Labour and Conservative conferences going on at the moment. I think Conservatives yet to happen, but I think Labour's on now.
I've got to just.
Liverpool,
I'm just going to answer Davey 1602 in the chat. He said Gab was getting popular when everyone was banned. That's true. And I use Minds more than Twitter. Now, officially on Minds, I've got over 4,000 followers, but you wouldn't believe it from the.
You probably get no
interaction. Like, I don't get that sort of. I don't get anyone replying too much. You know, I mean, not anyone, but I don't get many.
ING a bit more difficult for you, given that you're you're an expat. But for everyone here who isn't, and who is still living in England or Britain and plans to carry on doing so, I would recommend, like what Homeland's doing. I'd recommend getting together with local like-minded people, because one of the hardest things is feeling like you're kind of isolated, and we all have a tendency to do that when we sit online talking to people most of us have never met. We don't know each other from Adam. We don't know where we live or anything like that. I had such a brilliant time talking to people from Wales and the Midlands and Scotland, and you definitely get a sense that there's more people out there that think like you than I think just being on Twitter does. Also, Twitter is absolutely swamped with rank Americanism.
Yeah. And I will say, like, this is something I've been. I was just going to say, this thing I've been going on about for a while is that, like a lot of people cry about groups that form that don't do anything like overtly political, and it's like, it doesn't fucking matter. Like, social events are like a massive thing in of themselves. You can the amount that, like, I mean, I went to the Witten 2 weeks ago as well, and obviously some people don't like it because of certain people that are affiliated with it, but going to any event like that and just chatting and laughing and joking about the state of the country with people that are actually genuinely like-minded, it first off does so much for your mental health, but it also it's just an incredible opportunity to network. And like, out of some of these meetups, we've seen an incredible breadth of like right-wing magazines that focus on things like English literature and periodical. I've been reading one recently that has like periodical short stories, like the old newspapers and stuff like that. And all of these things have been born out of these types of events. So yeah, we need more of this stuff.
It's an interesting thing. I mean, I happened to see Taxpayers Alliance there, and that's got a chap in it called Harwood. Is it Harwood? Yarwood. Yeah. He's an old mallard hand, and I think all of them have kind of gone on to do different things. But I think that's possibly a good thing, because they got out from it what they could, and now they're all, operating independently in lots of different areas rather than just one individual area, if that makes sense. So they're probably achieving more now, having, got together, discussed their ideas as real people in real life, done something with it, solidified them, and now they're helping build other organizations.
Adam and Davey 1602 is asking if you met Morgoth at the Wim.
Yes, I did.
There you go.
He's a lovely chap. People,
Morgoth's
I remember
been on the stream a couple of times, by the way, as a special guest. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember the Walrus guys from the Longhouse met him, and they said that he looks like the real life North FC. I'm here to say that I think that's slanderous. That's not true. He's a well dressed, working class but well dressed gentleman.
Good. And it's perfectly possible to be a working class gentleman. I knew many of them when I was a teenager in Britain who'd fought in World War I and this sort of stuff.
I always imagined Morgoth like carrying around like his fishing, like had a fishing hat and his fishing rods with him, like everywhere he goes, sort of thing.
Yeah, you just imagine him like Bilbo in the Hobbit films.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think Morgoth would be a bit more warrior-like than Bilbo, but yeah, okay.
And also, Splendid Badger in chat said Corncrake had some of my poems in their issue 6. Yes, I picked up their latest issue actually, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. I recommend that to anyone that's into their English literature and is looking for a proper English literature magazine. Whereas, English literature has kind of fallen by the wayside in recent years. They're doing a good job to revive it, so well worth it.
Yeah, and also I shout out to a friend of mine, Nathan Hood, who also was there and has been doing a lot.
Oh yeah, Nathan's a really good guy.
Yeah.
I've been trying to get Nathan on this stream for ages. I think he has been on once, if I remember correctly. But Nathan's in my Discord and he's a good guy. Could I just say as an aside before we move on a bit, that Lady of Shalott who most people in the chat will know, is trying to organise a kind of an Australian version of the Within. So let's hope that goes forward. And obviously, I've offered her what help I can offer her, and I know some other people have on the Discord. And if we do one, hopefully we'll get a guest from UK or maybe even more than one, and possibly from America as well. So yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's important. I went with some of the guys from the Worcester Club recently, and we just, we went out to a local town, took in what English culture there was there to take in. So we went to, some of the local churches and various other bits and bobs around the town, and then we took in some of the other English culture and went to the pub.
Yeah.
Perfect. Real life stuff is very important. It definitely is.
Duke, I'll bring from the West Country Darky Day to Australia. I'll import Darky Day to Australia.
What's that?
It's like it's like a Cornish Morris dancing.
Okay, yeah, I know what you mean.
Where they black this, they black up their faces.
I know what you mean.
Darky Day.
Another question for you, John. What do you think about? And I know this happened before Farage took over, but what do you think about people like Bo from the Lotus Eaters and Dan, who I really like? I like Bo and Dan; they're both good guys. What do you think about those guys being deselected as Reform candidates?
I think everything I've already said applies equally as much to them too. I think I've had a run-in with Bo on Twitter. He's got zero personality as far as I'm concerned when it comes to Twitter. I've listened to some of his streams. I think they're on balance pretty good, and I don't dislike him as a person.
He's good
when
at
it comes to streams,
sure.
But when it comes to Twitter, he's got zero sort of message discipline or anything like that, and I think he's a liability, and I think they're right not to have anything to do with him personally.
I think it's unfair for Dan though.
Yeah,
I mean he's
about Dan.
I
don't know enough to comment about that.
Yeah, fair enough.
I've not had any interactions with him. Bo, as I say, I like his content. I'm not a fan of his social media presence, and I think that cost him potentially a seat.
Yeah. Just a quick one. Economic Erudite in chat said, question for John. Did anyone boo Harwood during the conference? Was Harwood at the conference?
Harwood, I assume we're talking Tom Harwood of GB News.
He
was, of course, at the conference covering it, but he wasn't like speaking or anything. He was just. GB News had a so when you went into the main, so not the seating area, but the kind of vendor hall, which had all the food stands and stuff. GB News was front and center. It was the only media establishment that had a kind of booth set up from which to report from. I think other news establishments were there, but they were, I would say, very much treated like the ginger stepchild, and they had to sort of just slum it with everyone else. All the kind of local press and stuff. Which had a big, almost like a studio setup, if you like.
Yeah, which is as it should be. I mean, I know a lot of people have a lot of good criticisms of GB News, but ultimately, if they're willing to hear you out and be fair to you, you need to be sort of feeding back your energy back into them as well, and sort of.
I would say
direction.
I would say on this topic, I think, because that's happened before the election. I would say going forward, I would hope Farage and people in Reform wouldn't punch right, given that we have seen a two-tier. We got the two-tier government policy to dealing with certain crimes and I would say arguably abuse of the system when it comes to prosecutions.
There were lots of Scots in attendance today, and I think if you want a candidate that's as viscerally vile about Scotland as Bo was, then that's going to cause you difficulties. You know, the party is a unionist party.
I know. I get the message discipline. I don't get me wrong. I get that, and yeah, that's because again, it's the same thing with Lawrence Fox as I was saying earlier. He's a disaster. You wouldn't have him around. Same with Tommy Robinson as well.
I think Carl's learnt it better than the others. Although I still think he's never going to live down what he said about Jess Phillips. And he'll probably regret that for the rest of his life because
he was an
idiot. It will make him unelectable ever.
It was a schoolboy joke made by a man in his 30s. It was pathetic.
A man in his 30s with a wife and I assume daughters, or at least sons that he'd like to treat women with respect and decency. Even
the main problem.
Economic erudite in the chat is asking about Tice cucking to hope, not hate. Now, economic erudite has been plugging the Worcester Club in the chat, so I presume he's an ally of yours, John. But I do agree with that. I mean, hope not hate should not be telling Reform who their candidate should be. Do you not agree?
Of course, I agree. However, that doesn't mean that what Bo said was inappropriate and potentially made Reform look really, really stupid in front of potential members and voters.
I mean, it wasn't only Bo. It wasn't only Bode and Dan. There were like other
there was about half a dozen
online people. And,
look, I think Reform got very lucky with the candidates that they did end up with as MPs because 4 of them are old hands, so to speak, and they get the kind of message discipline and all that kind of stuff. And the 5th seems to be an all-round. I mean, he's got a past, and of course that's been dug up. But he's 10 years on from that with a family and kids and all that kind of stuff, and there's no evidence that that's repeatable behaviour. And he seems on the same page. I think they got lucky. I think they could have easily ended up with some complete crackpot lunatics that would just make it, destroy it while it was in the womb, if you like.
Yeah, I'd say with regards to Sargon, Sargon will still block people from reminding him of that rape joke he made.
Look, I don't typically watch too much Lotus Eater stuff. I like Connor. I like Sargon. I'll still watch anything he puts out on his old channel. I like what Callum is actually doing more now than what I did when he was doing on the Lotus Eaters.
Dan's pretty good, I think. John,
I've not watched.
Dan's a pretty sensible dude.
Stuff. I like Josh, and I think I've got one of the other chaps in my Discord.
Harry,
yeah, they're generally fairly likable. And as I said, I don't dislike Bo's content. I just think he was. Look, I think fair play to them. They are doing what none of us are doing, which is putting their name and face out there associated with their content. But I think they've got to realise that when you do that, you can't talk like an anonymous nobody and expect there to be no consequences.
Yeah, look, I you've got to be sensible what you say in public. You do. Economic erudite is asking me to put links out. My Discord is a closed Discord. Economic erudite.
I don't know if he's saying.
I can tell you that John has a link. If he wants to join my Discord, he can. He's perfectly welcome in my Discord and always has been. But
I think Andrew,
I don't put it out in public just because. Even fairly recently, we had a chap in our Discord who was not what he said he was. So.
I've put a link to the Worcester Club one in the private chat, which is.
Do you want me to share it in the general?
Yeah, you can do that, Adam, but I will absolutely put it under the stream after the stream. I'll put a link to the Worcester Club.
Sure. I will say you're welcome. Anyone's welcome to join, but I do enforce the rules. Like I'm not gonna, given the state of political affairs in the UK, I'm not gonna let you start windmill posting or whatever in the chat. That's just not going to happen.
Quite right. Quite right, John. Like I said, John, my Discord is like about 50 people, and they're all known by other people in the Discord, pretty much. Otherwise, you don't get to join. And I had a guy not so long ago who, it seems, got an Australian YouTuber, the Franklin, lost him his channel, apparently.
It was, yeah, a deranged communist who was pretending to be right wing, and then did like this whole schizo YouTube thread of like on this channel and everything.
I think that potentially cost Reform a number of votes because they had a similar sort of problem, didn't they? They had an activist turn up on the day claiming to want to support them, and then apparently from the get-go was with his sort of filmographer trying to say stuff to discredit Reform.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yep, I remember that.
Yeah, we covered that quite extensively at the time. Do you think, John, that that was an actor, or was that just a genuine Reform?
Well, it certainly seems to be the case that he is an actor.
Yeah.
That I mean, he's got a LinkedIn. I think was it a LinkedIn profile and stuff that sort of, you know, he is a genuine actor. Whether he was acting on the day, I guess none of us will ever really know. Look, I spoke to some people at the conference that would possibly fall into that bracket of, you know, they're genuine people, but if they said what they really thought and they said that on camera, then, you know, that would probably, you know, cost the party some votes. I'm sure there are.
I mean, this is the thing. Like in my office, like I know of there's like I'd say more than two, but I'm not going to get into any specifics. People that would say exactly what he said on film. So I don't find it that unrealistic that this older, outspoken fellow who's gone out and involved himself in politics.
He was using Adam, and he was using his acting voice rather than his real voice, which I find deeply suspicious myself.
Yeah, he was, as I understand it, he was putting on a bit of a working class accent, if you will.
He was.
It sounded like a very over exaggerated gammon type accent. You know, like you hear
exactly on
like on like a BBC shows and stuff. Yeah.
But
I think that's exactly right. Just before, look, and is there anything else anyone on here wants to bring up about Nigel Farage and Reform before we move on to our final topic?
I would just say, I mean, Homeland Party, I mean, because I think like Adam said, like, you go, I can't remember what you said, but like my stance on Steve Laws, but basically, I say Steve Laws, he has his uses in terms, like he has his purpose in the sense that he can pressure Farage, like he's like further to the right, and he can pressure Farage to be a lot more robust than he currently is, or at least the Overton window will allow him to be. But at the same time, also, well, But at the same time,
I mean, on
he basically has to act part of like Richard Reinhardt at Arsuf, if I want to use a military metaphor about it. Very disciplined and cautious, I suppose, will be the best way to describe it.
I mean, on the topic of Farage and, you know, other people on the right, I think, you know, if maybe, you know, Farage's been around long enough, I think people like Steve Laws, people, maybe even the Homeland Party, which I'm sure he's aware of. I'm sure he's aware of the Homeland Party, and people in Reform are aware of it because it is, you know, it is something that exists and is organised on, even if it's on a very small, particularly local level, it's still a thing. Maybe he may want to do the sort of Machiavellian technique of using figures like Steve Laws or people in the Homeland Party to say the more stuff that he can't say without, you know, due to, you know, political reasons. Yeah, and he can feel I mean, don't want to bring up the old National Socialists, but if you actually look at the technique that they would utilize in Germany, it wasn't so much Mustache Man who would say like the base stuff on stage. It would usually be his underlings like Goebbels and stuff, that they would be the ones to say the base stuff. He would be the more moderate voice, and that's an old political technique.
I wouldn't want to compare Reform to the Nazi Party.
No,
but,
nor would I actually. I think that would be a foolish thing to do.
I think Richard Tice, since having stepped down from leader, has been playing effectively that part, if you like. He's been much more outspoken when it comes to sort of hope not hate and stuff like that than he was as leader. I think he recognises that as leader you don't necessarily have quite the freedom that you do as a...
Tice has been fairly based since he stopped being leader, for sure. I would also just say this. Look, our brothers in the Old Glory Club, which is a heritage American group, now they're all totally supporting Trump. And it has to be said that in terms of mass immigration, Nigel Farage is much more based than Trump is. He is.
I still don't think Trump's going to win. Maybe I'm in a minority here.
Yeah, no.
I
think they might fiddle it. Mitch, sorry, John. I think they might well fiddle it in the swing states, which is all they need to do.
As someone that won 1,100 quid on the 2016 election, I've put no money on him in any subsequent elections.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Adam, and I think you're right. I think those people who think they won't fortify this American presidential election,
even if you discount that, he was an underrated quantity then, and now he's a massively overrated quantity.
I mean, Iron Duke, not Iron Duke, not to do down the Americans here, but unfortunately, I think that the Americans have been so deracinated and degenerated. There's enough of them that will probably vote Kamala Harris anyway. They won't need to actually fiddle the numbers. I hate to say it, but that's just
That's
not throwing shade.
I think we're all in agreement.
That's not throwing
I
shade.
get what you're saying. I know you're not.
I'm not throwing shade at Americans.
Yeah,
I'm not throwing shade at the Americans on the right or anything with that. But I do think there are I see regularly a lot of Americans who are like yes queen, brat president, all that sort of crap. So I don't think they need to rig it.
Look! I said, all I'm trying to say is this: is that all of our American brothers are throwing their whole weight behind Trump, and I don't blame them. If I was an American, I would vote Trump.
I think he is the underdog here, and I think that
maybe. All I'm trying to say, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying here, John. All I'm trying to say is that Farage is actually more based on mass immigration than Trump is. That's all I'm trying to say. Nothing else.
Yeah, but they're coming from very different perspectives. I mean, America is... I mean, for all the left say about England being a nation of immigrants, America genuinely is a nation of immigrants.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. That's all I was trying to say.
It's a good thing Yiz, who I was speaking to the other week, isn't here, because I think we would disagree on that point. But yeah, I know what you mean. The foundation of America, fundamentally, it is harder to argue immigration in America, definitely more so than it is in the UK.
I mean, you can certainly make the argument that it came from vastly different countries to where it's coming from now. That's an argument you can make.
But I mean, also, Britain was not a nation of immigrants at all until 1948.
No, outside of a handful of invasions, which brought very few people with them.
Yeah, and we're all Northwest Europeans anyway. But yeah, it did. But
I've argued this point before. It didn't really make much of a difference to the people that were living here that were being invaded, whether they were Northwest Europeans or not. It's still an invasion.
I mean, it is silly because the Normans that came here basically became the new aristocracy or governing elites and bishops and stuff. So
they weren't welcome and heralded the way it led rebellion against them, and there were multiple rebellions against them. They were just as unwelcome as we feel about the current group of invaders.
Although they were, I would argue, eventually absorbed into the Anglo-Celtic people. Largely. I know Mitch won't totally agree with that.
I disagree with that. Because it's, I mean, if you're talking about the Norman, if you're talking about the Vikings, I think you still have a massive north-south divide, and that's virtually along the Watling Street line. If you're talking about the Normans, that was a aristocratic replacement, and as we all know, the aristocracy generally keeps themselves because that's how you preserve your lineage, and don't water it down. And then you get into the Huguenots and a handful of sort of Jews that William of Normandy brought with him from Rouen, and I don't think you're talking about a lot of infusion. I don't think any of our guests at any point in the history of our nation have ever particularly integrated. I think that's what, in my mind, really sort of belies the fact that integration as a whole is.
And this is from very closely related people with pretty close cultures.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
I mean, I would say King Stephen, for all his faults, because he wasn't a good king by any stretch of imagination. He did try and appeal to the Anglo-Saxons.
The 1100s, or
well, basically.
You're always going back to the 1100s in England and Britain.
I mean,
land.
You could argue. I mean, David Starkey. The reason why he focused on the Tudors. I mean, you could argue the Tudors being like at least they were of a native house. They weren't. Wales, but
Welsh, to be honest.
Welsh in England since 1284. So. The notion of Wales as a country is ridiculous because the very name is just the Anglo-Saxon word for foreigner. It doesn't mean
it's a principality, isn't it? Really?
Well, it doesn't mean a nation in the same sense that England was a nation.
And also South Wales and North Wales are very different. Like South Wales is very different to North Wales. Probably less so these days, but certainly back in the old days, they almost used to be two separate places.
Well, that and Cornwall is Wales as well, technically. I mean,
to some degree.
Yeah.
Well, no, the name has the same root etymology. The Wall part of Cornwall comes from the same place that the Wales part of Wales comes from.
All right, guys, I've got one more subject for us this evening.
Sorry. Prior to it being known as Cornwall, it was known as South Wales, I think.
Can I just answer something from a chat? I'll just say, whole nation of immigrants. I mean, people think it's a hard seller. No, it was Ellis Island that spelled it, because the true America was the Wasps, and Ellis Island kind of spelled the end of. People think Heart Cellarax is what screwed over America. I'd say in some ways Ellis Island also did as well, because originally America was meant to just be, Northern Europeans like Germans, Scandinavians, English, Irish.
It was all meant to be English, right?
Sorry?
It was all meant to be English, let's be honest.
Well, I mean, it was meant to be Northern European Protestants. So, for example, Scandinavians settling Minnesota wasn't too much of a big deal.
It was all. It's worth pointing out. It was the worst parts of our country, the puritanical parts.
I mean, I would say though, to counter that, John, Appalachia, like the South, for example, was mainly Ulster Scots. Those on the frontiers of the colonies. So, as well, particularly in the South, hence why you do have a differing of cultures between North and South in the sense of puritanical New England types and the Ulster Scots of the South and the Appalachians.
All I'm saying is that the states that vote Democrat seem to be largely the original sort of states that were set up, the sort of 13 states.
Yeah, Yeah,
all the ones that were colonised by the Puritans.
And they are quite homogenous. I mean, they are like, what was it, like 93% white. So
Yeah, but they're the ones
New
killing
England.
the nation by voting for flipping Kamala Harris and Joe
I know,
Biden.
maybe the New Englanders are like the end boss of like
I'm
all
glad they
NIMBYs.
left.
Like, but John, I actually think we talk about like NIMBYs in like Surrey or somewhere like that. I actually think like the New England types are like the ultimate like Giga Chad, or not even Giga Soy, I should say, Giga Soy NIMBYs. The ultimate ones in that sense.
I will not have anything said against NIMBYism. You have to keep out the YIMBY. The YIMBY will destroy your community for a few pounds. The YIMBY, the YIMBY is the Judas Iscariot of the community. He'll preach about wanting to make things better, but he'll just ruin it for everyone.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan
don't
of
mind-
that guy, I have to say.
I don't mind. John, I don't mind that ideal of elitism. It's just, you don't have you have it for the whole country, not just a small region, sort of thing.
What do you mean? Sorry.
Well, I said I'm gonna say I don't mind the. Now, when it comes to standards of NIMBYism standards, because I live in the West Country. I live in an area which is heavily lived very white.
And you live in an area that hasn't been despoiled by the YIMBY, so you don't see the problem with the YIMBY. And the problem is you don't see the problem with the YIMBY until it's too late and your community's been utterly destroyed.
I mean, that is correct in that sense, but that's my point. I don't. But the trouble is, the NIMBY is, the NIMBY is effectively stuck in the trance where they can easily be defeated. I'm at the gate.
The NIMBY is what separates us from the animals.
I'm at the gates, John. I'm at the gates. I'm the warden at the gates, and I'm there warning people of the coming horde. And people are sort of just dancing and carrying on in their bohemian lifestyles. And I'm like,
that's because they're all YIMBYs.
Come on, guys.
Because they all think it's wonderful. Oh, look at all this diversity. Wouldn't it be great if we had some here? Oh, no, I need to move.
That's why I'm the warden at the gates.
Yeah, I think John's right
I'm
about
the
this. I do think John's right about this, I've got to say. Guys, we've been going for almost an hour and 3/4, and I wanted to bring us on to our last subject. Now, I presume all of the panel have watched Apostolic Majesty's recent video, which was called something like British Republicanism, a Necessary Evil. I take it everyone has seen that video.
No, I'm not seen it.
It's not
I've
most
seen it.
Yeah, I've watched it.
Yeah, I watched it, yeah.
And he is basically arguing in that video that the current king has so betrayed the British people and moved away from what he should be doing in terms of being the British monarch and also the head of the Church of England that we kind of need to replace him. He is not suggesting that Britain becomes a republic forever, but he is suggesting we might need a better British king. Now, as John knows, I'm no fan of Charles III. I'm sorry, I'm just not. I swore a personal oath of allegiance to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and I took it seriously, but I'm not a fan of her son. Discuss. Go for it.
It's
go on now. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say I watched the video, and I think his main point of contention is what the government's euthanasia legislation, that the fact that it was going to be, I mean, it wasn't, of course, it wasn't in the manifesto, and that it was meant to be, it was being fast tracked through Parliament, and it was going to be like a free private members bill. And so it brought in the king, and his point is that he isn't happy that the fact that there isn't any intervention like the Belgian king in the 1990s.
Hang on, AI. I've got to interrupt you here. The thing that AM was saying is it's not a private member's bill; it's a government bill, and therefore
that's what I meant. It was it went from being a private member to actually being a government bill. So there was it had to be signed from royal assent.
So how can how can the head of the Church of England support that? Which I totally agree with him about, by the way, because I'm absolutely against this Canadian style assisted suicide nonsense. I'm just against it. It really is bad.
Yeah, I mean, if I was to, I was going to say just on my final take on this. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I don't think Charles is. If I was looking at the history of English monarchs, I don't. Charles is obviously not up there in the top 10. Let's be honest.
You would argue that probably the majority of our monarchs post Charles I are not really up there, because at that point you effectively, our monarchy has never been an absolute monarchy, never. Not in the history of the UK, not in the history of England even. It's always been a monarchy effectively by agreement and by committee. I think that, well, what I would say is that I would encourage anyone to read the book that Prince, now King Charles, co-wrote, called Harmony, because I think it helps you to understand where he's coming from. I think he's a very thoughtful person. If I were to say which kind of historic king I think he would be most like, I would probably say he was sort of like a Henry VI kind of character. So he's someone that is more intellectual, would probably want to be seen as founding, great institutions that might last thousands of years, which is what Henry VI did in between his bouts of madness. I think it's very easy to look critically on him, but he faces a situation that isn't one that's of his making, is not really one that he has the constitutional power to materially change, and so he's faced with how he plays his part in creating a better atmosphere with the hand he's dealt. I think it's very easy to just say he should act like a Louis XIII and just remove everyone he hates, kind of thing, or everyone we hate.
John, what about Apostolic Majesty's suggestion that he followed? I think it was the Belgian king, but it might have been the Dutch. But I think it was the Belgian king.
It was the Belgian king.
Who was asked to pass some legislation. And because he didn't agree with it, he temporarily abdicated in order to do so. So you made it very clear he didn't support that legislation.
I would argue
Charles
that
had not done that.
I would argue that Charles absolutely is technically within his power to veto any bill. He does not have to provide royal assent. However, the constitution is such and has evolved as such that he effectively does always give consent, and it's not just him. That's been the case for many years. I can't remember when the last time it was kind of vaguely overtly known that it was kind of threatened with being withheld. It's many, many, many years ago, and it almost caused a constitutional crisis then. What I would say is that the monarchy is known for discussing these things with the Privy Council behind closed doors, and I think it's certainly been the case in the past, and I think Queen Elizabeth was known for having done this on a number of occasions, that they will basically say, you need to amend something because I can't put my name to this, and you will cause a constitutional crisis if you try and push this through as it currently stands or as you're currently conceiving of it. And I think that happens more than we're aware of.
Doesn't seem to have happened in the case of this particular bill, but okay.
I mean, I would say, Andrew, is it a failing of the king? I mean, of course, the king here is the head honcho, so the buck stops with him. But it is more of a failing with the Church of England than anything else, because the Church of England is just, I mean, this is their
don't get me wrong.
This is
I
their
totally
domain,
agree
really.
with that. Yep, I do totally agree with that. The Church of England should have come out and said, no, we can't do this, which would have given the king, as the head of the Church of England, more support in turning around and saying, sorry, I can't assent to this, which is what he should have done.
Which bill are we talking about in particular?
The
euthanasia.
assisted euthanasia
dying.
thing. Yeah,
Has that gone through? Has it?
it's going to. It was, and it wasn't in the King's speech.
Well, this is a consequence of having a party with 410 MPs. I mean,
but
it's being fast tracked. But
I mean, like,
they're not being.
This is one thing, Rob. Is like, at the end of it, King Charles does have agency, right? He can just like he can just say, even if you were to have to do what King Baldwin, however you pronounce it, of Belgium, did, like, because at the end of the day, like,
temporarily abdicated while that bill was going through Parliament to make clear he didn't support it.
I don't know whether our constitution would permit something in the same vein, but I get the impression that Keir Starmer would happily take Charles's resignation and not appoint a new monarch. So I think you have to be kind of careful what you wish for.
Do you really think he would do that? John? Because I just see if King Charles had made a public statement, I don't support this. I think the vast majority of Brits, like even the very, very unwoken normies, would have said, "No, King don't like this."
It doesn't matter what the vast majority of Brits want. There's a 410 seat majority in Parliament,
which makes democracy a joke, of course. But
democracy doesn't exist in the UK, not in the sense that it existed in ancient Greece. We have,
and it's gay, and we wouldn't want it anyway.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Adam. But
we are not a democracy. We are a constitutional monarchy, and the constitution has evolved such that the House of Commons is the one that effectively holds all the power.
Well, I mean, also, Starmer wants to destroy the House of Lords.
I mean, the Lords is over. The Lords is done. The bill went through. There will be no more hereditary Lords. The only Lords you have in there now that aren't under the direct
political appointees
are the Lords spiritual, a handful of them that are left, and let's be honest, even those are basically political appointments.
All lefties,
and probably have been for 1,000 years.
Well, I'm not sure they were political lefties for 1,000 years.
Well, they weren't lefties, but they were all politically appointed, is what I'm saying. They're not appointed because they're necessarily perceived to be the bastions of spiritual worthiness. They're appointed because they're going to advance the politics of whoever appoints them. That's the real politics. Let's be honest.
I mean, you have to remember with Queen Victoria, you even had like political appointee chambermaids, between like wives of Whigs and Tories. So, I mean, that's how. Yeah, I mean, yes, there has been that consistent, balancing act.
I've always been, at least for the last 5 to 10 years, in favour of restoring the Lords to a hereditary system.
Yep.
Straight up.
But I don't. I'm at the point now where you may as well just abolish it, because what you've got is not, in any sense, a reasonable second chamber. You just as well do away with it. It's completely irrelevant to the way Parliament really actually functions. Commons have the whole power. They don't have to take anything the Lords say. They can overrule them on every single thing.
Well, that's been the way since like 1912 or 1911 when King. Which king was it? King George.
And Winston Churchill totally supported the neutering of the House of Lords. By the way, totally supported it as a newly crossed the floor to the Liberals. dude.
I mean,
This is great and all,
with
but I
the
do need to get
Supreme-
off because I've got to get up really early in the morning. So I've stayed later than I should have anyway. But I was enjoying the conversation.
Many
so.
thanks for joining us, Armin, as
Yeah,
always,
good to
mate.
talk, actually.
Go well.
Yeah, no problem. Good night, everyone. Talk to you
Good
all
night.
soon.
Anything you wanted to plug, Armin?
No, I'm good. No, thanks,
All right, mate. Go well.
Right, see you later.
Yeah,
think
I don't know. It's like we live in this strange world these days where it was difficult to argue against Apostolic Majesty's central thesis, which is that the monarchy in Britain today is just this weird totem with no power and nothing. You know,
you Apostolic Majesty may be correct in his diagnosis of the problem, but I think if your solution is to appoint a new monarch, it may be the ideal, but I think if you got rid of the House Windsor, you would not be replacing them with another monarchy. So I subscribe to what Powell's entire argument essentially was around the House of Lords and keeping the hereditary peers, which is that you take the cards you're dealt and you play them as best you can. And I think you risk ending the game entirely by trying here and there.
I mean, fundamentally, though, we can all agree that in a healthy society, a normal healthy society, you would have moral unity, but from the king down to the masses, like has existed. As like the the best example. I mean, yes, we talk about Normans, where there were times where that, of course, that wasn't the case, but in large parts, that sort of moral unity down from the king to the masses. And the problem is, I think what Apostolic Majesty is saying, I mean, yeah, he's right. I don't disagree with a lot of what was said in that video. I do agree, but the problem is, it goes back to like one of the things that we were talking about Iron Duke I think a month ago or something with Peter Hitchens, is his, he has this love of the institutions, and the problem is, I mean, all institutions in the UK have been largely corrupted.
they've all been
some
captured,
more than others, but they've all been captured and corrupted, or just corrupted, however you want to phrase it. And they now represent the power in the modern world, in the modern West. And none of us like it.
But why is that?
That's how it is.
It's because people have walked away from all of them. And I had this to say to Sargon of Akkad. He was. I think it might have been to do with Christianity, and he's very much in the Dawkins camp, where he seems to love the fruits but isn't interested in the tree. And I think if you keep running away from these organizations as soon as they get even the whiff of lefty entrenchment, then you might as well give up. You're just going to keep running forever. You can't. You're weak, pathetic.
I do think if you are a traditionalist or anyway right wing or nationalist, and you are an atheist, I get why people like to go in the pagan route or something like that. I do get that, but
what they don't. I'm not a Church of England goer, as a a Sunday worshipper, but I do go for the sort of institutional ceremony. So I do go for like. Armistice Day and so on, and I do go for the various sort of ceremonies throughout the year. So I'll go for the Stations of the Cross and things like that at Easter, but I go to my own denomination as a general rule on Sunday. But I'll also go to bell ringing groups and things like that. And I think what Sargon of Akkad and co fail to understand is that, and a lot of us do the same, is that the Church of England isn't it fulfills many of the same roles as a church, but it isn't a church. It is the ceremonial arm of the English state. And by withdrawing yourself from that, you are ceding the ground to whichever person wants to backfill your presence. I think the most important thing you can do is go to some of these groups and be relatively outspoken. When you know, the audience is filled with a handful of people being pro-left, you can actually be the right-wing voice that says, well, I don't agree with you and here's why. And you'll find that you'll end up with some support, because a lot of people just sit there with their lips shut because they think they're the only one in the room thinking the way they think.
Very true. Very true.
Well,
I'm
an
agnostic, okay? And I used to be an atheist years ago. Haven't been for years now. I'm an agnostic. I don't know about that stuff. But I do think that John is right, that the Church of England is an institutional thing.
It's about
I got married in a Church of England church with a high church vicar.
It's why you have...
And I got my son baptized in a Church of England church with the same high church vicar.
It's why up and down the country you'll have the regimental chapel in any major town. You'll have a Church of England church which has the local regimental colours and stuff. I mean, what has that got to do with religion? Absolutely nothing.
It's an institution. But it has been captured, John. It has. It's like the people who run the Church of England are awful bloody lefties. They just are.
Sure, I'm not disagreeing with you there. But if you go, oh, they're awful bloody lefties, so I'm not going to go anymore. Well done. You've given it to them on a plate.
No, look, I think if your local vicar is a high Church of England dude, who doesn't agree with female vicars and all this kind of stuff, I think that's perfectly good, and you should absolutely go to that church if you support traditional Britain. But the higher echelons of it have all been totally captured.
I would say I wouldn't get too hold up on. I mean, on the institutional level. I mean, in the Soviet Union, because that was. I mean, in that case, it was different in the sense that the church was directly persecuted, worshipping of Christianity. It was state atheism, and the adherence of the church was. I think it was between 10-20%, and it steadily rose. And then of course post Soviet Union, the numbers have gone up a bit, but it's become like a present representation in Russian society and Russian governance, particularly under Vladimir Putin's rule there. I mean, I would say so I wouldn't get too hung up on that in that sense, but I would say that if you're looking on a more spiritual or Christian theological level, probably the Church of England isn't like the place to be in that regard, because I very much view the religion of it itself, looking towards a higher form of higher being, higher greatness. And that sort of thing I don't really see or hear in the Church of England today.
Mitch, what's your thinking on this stuff, mate?
I mean, I just don't. I just don't see how anyone, for example, can support the House of Windsor, because I'm thinking the House of Windsor Roger abrogated every monarchical instinct. I mean, the House of Lords, for example, sacrosanct political institution, very attended to our constitution, and yet the monarchy have just allowed it to just be phased out in favour of what is now just a Blair-like contraption. And
the last monarch who tried to influence the government was Queen Victoria. Basically, she was the last one who tried it. Since then, they've just totally gone along with everything.
The monarch who proved the point of where power lay is in my avatar, and was made a master for it.
Oh yeah. I mean, look, I don't like the Stuarts, John. I don't like them. I don't think they were good monarchs. But during the English Civil War, I would have supported the king against Parliament just because he was the king.
Queen Elizabeth I essentially ran the monarchy into the ground. Charles tried to Charles tried to rule as the monarchy had ruled prior to Queen Elizabeth, and he found out.
No, I don't disagree with that.
But the way I say,
and of course, the Dutch Revolution and everything made it worse. But
I mean, as I've said before, I mean, I would say Charles I was such a bad king that he probably would push. I probably would be pushed to side with Cromwell just because he was a poor king.
I don't think he was I think he made some tactical mistakes during Civil War. I think he tried to rule as a king had prior to Elizabeth I.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that, John. I would have supported King Charles, even though I wouldn't have supported all these policies.
In various courts of law, it was found that the taxes he was trying to levy, they were perfectly legal. The ship taxes and so on, perfectly legal. It was just a case that the mercantile class forced him out. They had it too good under Elizabeth, and they didn't want to go back to how it used to be.
Well, I mean, I'd say Queen Elizabeth is one of the worst monarchs we've ever had, in my personal opinion.
I mean, to be fair, that that he was a king of, well, the Stuarts were the kings of Scotland and the inheritors of the Kingdom of England in that regard, and so I guess maybe Charles, his governance of Scotland, or the Stuarts, James and the Charles as the governance of Scotland. Is how they govern Scotland is how it is also informed of how they govern England, and that wasn't at the time probably compatible with the power groups on the ground.
And Charles I's father, James, was a despicable man. I mean, I'm sorry, he just was.
Like I'd say,
absolutely despicable man.
Like I'd say, let's say for argument's sake, if we had in an ideal world, we'd have something like what we had before the Norman Conquest. Like we had the Witten, whereupon you have a combination of nobles, clergy, and mercantile classes all coming together to choose a king.
Yep.
As opposed to I don't know, let's say primogeniture, where at the end of the day, it's like primogeniture has its uses, but at the same time, it can also yield you some terrible kings like King John or Charles I or Queen Elizabeth I, and both Elizabeths, I should say.
Look, in some ways, Mitch, Queen Elizabeth I was a good queen because she was Gloriana, and we beat the Spanish Armada and all this.
It's absolutely meaningless. It cost you the concept of a monarchy altogether.
Yeah, but where Queen Elizabeth I let England down was she didn't get married and have children. So as a result, we got James from Scotland, who was a despicable man in every respect.
Yeah, I don't like Queen Elizabeth. I mean, it's like it's the same with the Empress Sisi of Austria in the sense that they just everybody feminist, you feel like everybody feminist would just use such examples to just rail against, and I look at someone like Queen Elizabeth and go, the fact that she didn't get married and thus have children because she went for the wrong men as a young woman or whatever. I just look at that and just go, okay, so she's subjected. So in her unwisdom of that moment, she ended up subjecting us to the Stuart dynasty, who I would regard as.
No, I think you're right, Mitch. I think that's totally true. Queen Elizabeth herself was quite a good queen, but because she didn't get married and didn't produce any children, she really let England down. This virgin queen shit is fine when you're there, but what happens when the next one comes along? Well, we end up getting James from Scotland, who was a despicable man in every single respect.
I would slightly push back on the virgin queen stuff because all
right. She might or might not have been totally virgin. I'm not arguing about that.
I'm not arguing against that part. I'm arguing against it because it just ever since I heard it. I mean, perhaps I'm being too impetuous with this, but it just come across as a very feminist way of looking at her life. It's just like, well,
totally agree with you, mate. I do totally agree. I think you're right.
Yeah. She just came across as, so she went for the wrong men like Dudley and so on. in her life, and well, she just turned off men, refused to have any children, and she doomed us to the Stuarts. The Tudor dynasty, I quite like, genuinely. But like Queen Elizabeth, I can't forgive her.
I can't. I'm not going to find fault with James I because it's through James I that we get the truest Bible ever published.
Yeah,
I mean,
he was also terribly gay and terribly dirty and all sorts of other things. I mean,
well, as you know, the best English monarch ever is Edward I, because he dealt with the true enemies of England, and that's Scotland.
Oh, look, I adore Alfred the Great of Wessex. I really like Henry V.
Yeah, they're all dead though.
Edward I, great guy. I think Queen Victoria wasn't so bad, to be honest, for the most part. She did try and influence her government quite strongly, and she did sometimes succeed. But after that, I don't know. I don't think Britain's had a good monarch since Victoria, certainly. I think Queen Elizabeth II failed to use any of her prerogatives, and she should have, and she never did.
Well, was it? No, it'd be a grandfather who started the kind of our constitution, really, in a sense, by destroying the House of Lords in favour of a liberal budget with David Lloyd George. Was David Lloyd George a prime minister, or was he the chancellor back then?
Yeah, but I mean, David Lloyd George and also Winston Churchill, who was also there at the same time. Totally agree.
On the subject of royal assent, I wanted to look it up. It's 1708 is the last time royal assent was withheld. So you can't blame it on Charles I. This is now a 300-year part of our constitution, and it's not even been the case that the king or queen themselves have granted royal assent for, I think, over 150 years. So it was granted by a committee. I can't remember which king it was. Basically, they were I think they might have been too ill to do it, or they just weren't interested in doing it. It might have been who was the one that had the Prince Regent?
That was the son of George III.
Yeah.
During the Napoleonic Wars.
It might have been him. Maybe after
William was his name, I believe.
But yeah, it's been a very long time that the king has even sat in Parliament or had to go into Parliament to provide royal assent. It's been by committee, and now I don't even think it's by that. I think it's just essentially almost assumed.
I guess
it's disappointing. But what are the monarchy actually doing for Britain anymore? I'm just not sure.
As a counter to all this discussion we've had, then, but if you go back to, say, the House of Hanover, which we're sort of discussing earlier, and look forward to Victoria and so on, the monarchy wasn't all powerful. It wasn't all powerful. Militaristic, feudal society that we were sort of you look back to, if you go back to Plantagenets and Norman era, but it didn't really matter in the sense, because there was still that moral unity among the society at the time. I mean, you didn't have like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people from far-flung areas of the world being brought into London and cities around Britain in the 18th century to change the dynamic, and for, like, say, the Whig Party to use them as like a client group to belittle Britain. I mean, I think while there's a lot of, and I don't want to be horrible to AM at all, but I don't want to say theory selling, but at the end of the day, there is, I think it just does ultimately come down to we know that there are, in the civil service, in the permanent bureaucracy, in the state, that there is ultimately a disgust and hatred of British people, and it demonstrates in multiple ways. Now, the most obvious way that we've seen recently is the sentencing guidelines that have been used against people involved in the riot disturbances, riots, what have you. I mean, the most extreme example you see is like someone that got 2 years for shouting at a police dog or something mad like that. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but so the excessive, sentencing that is
child
I
rapists
would
get
believe
no jail if they're immigrants.
and and then you have like the stuff with Hugh Edwards. So I think if we lived in if say we woke up tomorrow and Britain was run by people who were like John Met at Reform, who were genuine patriots of this country, and that everything was going hunky dory, I don't think people would really care as much if the monarchy was just a figurehead or didn't hold political power. I don't know. I don't think it would really. I mean, I'm sure AM would still care about it because he is a. But I don't think I don't think it would be a problem.
Could I just point out that Hugh Edwards, the BBC presenter who got no jail, what he was doing was paying quite a lot of money for videos of little children being raped. That's what he was doing.
I'd like to point out that I haven't paid TV license for over 10 years, so I'm not complicit in funding any of you. Just like to point that out.
Yeah, 100%, John. And
every one of you that carried on paying your TV license,
don't pay your BBC.
You
TV
paid
license
for those images.
Yeah, you gave that money to Hugh Edwards to pay another person money to watch 5, 6, and 7-year-olds being raped. That's what he did, and he's got no jail for that.
Oh yeah, but he had a complicated childhood. You've got to understand that. I mean, that's obviously that's mitigated.
I think as we've been paying all that money, Mitch, maybe we should go to Wales, pop on a trip to Wales for some collection time. I'm joking online. I'm joking.
In a good country, Hugh Edwards would have been executed. I'm sorry.
Whoa. Say goodbye to YouTube.
No. I'm sorry. You pay people to film little children being raped. You should be executed. That's my absolute opinion. I'm sorry.
John, you have to remember we are a very pro multicultural channel, and we absolutely applaud aspects of Islamic law, and we don't so that's how YouTube can't persecute us, because we are multiculturalists and we do like elements of Islamic law.
Listen, and we totally support the state of Israel. We really support the state of Israel.
We're the ultimate.
It's funny you should mention that, because one of the loudest cheers at the UKIP conference was when Farage said that Israel should have the right to defend itself.
I don't doubt it. No, I don't doubt it.
Yeah, I don't doubt that for a second. we have a mainstream media that is a bit biased, but
Israel should have the right to defend itself.
It should. It absolutely should. Defend itself.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it should be able to blow up women and children with their electronic devices, but I mean, that's just me.
Well,
I could be wrong.
I think the companies that I imagine there's not many companies that still make pages, but I think the one company somewhere that does make pages should have the right. Well, they should. I think they should have a right to defend themselves against Israel as well.
Well, apparently, all that's done is like given an enormous boost to Chinese electronic devices, because the Israelis can't interfere with those. So
I mean, guys, could you imagine like days before that happened, like someone went on Twitter and like was saying, listen, guys, the Jews, they control the lithium batteries in pagers in the Middle East or something like that.
everyone would have said conspiracy theory.
All I'm saying is I'm glad I don't have an electric car.
Yep. But I mean, you know, imagine if the British Army did that to people in Northern Ireland, for example, during the struggles. If we'd have suddenly blown up all these fire guys. Imagine if we'd have done that. Like, I reckon 90% of left-wing Twitter would have come down against England. But you know what? When Israel does it, it's all right. It's fucking
no, half of left is to some sort of Palestinians, right? I mean, they do it in a very contradictory way because, you know, on one hand, some of them, because a lot of them are consistent with not believing in nations, except when it comes to Palestine. So that's like, it's also, I mean, I'll be honest. The more I look at how the Palestinian crowd behave, the more I just think to myself, perhaps Israel has a point on some of these people.
Oh, listen, Mitch, I totally agree with you, mate. I don't care about either of them, to be honest with you. Right? I'm not a Palestinian. I'm not a small hat, and I don't care. They can kill each other as much as they like, so long as it doesn't involve my people.
I'd say this. I mean, so I've come across like some of these, so you know, the National Social, like Hitler, Weeaboo types. A lot of them are just turned into probably as well because the Muslims are just that bad on Twitter in regard to how they talk about Palestine and how much they talk about us. And I was just about thinking, I can't really blame them because the more I'm looking at the Muslim side, I'm more just thinking to myself, like, there's a Serbian.
Yeah, I don't like either of them, mate. I'm completely neutral about what happens in the Middle East. I just want no English and British people to die in their silly wars. They can kill each other as much as they like. Let them go for it.
The last time the Middle East worked is when it had a British flag flying over it.
100%.
Yeah.
Don't disagree.
But
then we had the King David Hotel and the hanged British sergeants and all sorts of other things going on. So yeah, absolutely.
But
yeah, I just say like, I mean, the way, I mean, it's like I don't know. Like I'd say in some ways, I mean, I'm not trying to be like pro Israel, but I'm saying there are some things about Israel though where you can't help but admire it because they'll blow up half of Gaza if they harm a head on a single Jewish person's head. Like there were hostages where Palestinians, you don't have to use your imagination, which is not what Palestinians would do to them.
I mean, in many ways, in that regard, they have a lot. You know, as you say, there's a lot to be respected about them. It's the same as America. You know, America refuses to acknowledge the Hague. I think if a US citizen is tried in the Hague, it's effectively a tantamount to a declaration of war.
Won't happen.
And as you say, you know, Palestine kills a few hundred Israelis. Well, Israel obliterates your nation. I wished I lived in a country that valued my life that much.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, John, like that can't be the only ethno state that is allowed in the world.
Yeah, I mean, going back to, let's just say hypothetically, we did the pager stuff to say IRA, Irish nationalists, paramilitary.
Should have done it to
I know, but if we did, let's be honest, half of America,
I would have.
Particularly,
I would. Listen, I did 2 tours in Northern Ireland with the British Army. I would have done exactly what you're saying, but there's no way the British government would have.
Yeah, but if that was done, I mean, America would come down on us like a ton of bricks, and
absolutely. But we don't would have betrayed us
like on like they've done on a numerous occasions in the previous century.
Mate. 1956 in the Suez Crisis, Britain doesn't have the Israel lobby like Israel basically controls US foreign policy. It does. Because no American serious politician can be anti-Israel. Because if they are, they'll be destroyed.
If I remember with Suez, didn't we get Israel involved on our side?
Yeah, they were on our side. Yeah, but at the time, the American Israel lobby had not yet taken over. This was before the USS Liberty and all this kind of stuff, you know.
Oh yeah, all that sort. Yeah. Later on, yeah.
It was before that.
I'd say with regards.
I was going to say I've stayed on about an hour longer than I was planning to, and I
many thanks for joining us, John.
But yeah,
is there anything like the Worcester Club you would like to?
Yes, I think the link got put in the chat. As I say, people are welcome to join.
I will make sure it's under the stream.
People are welcome to join if they just want to come and have a chat. As I say, don't bother coming in if you're just going to start spouting off a load of stuff about Adolf Hitler was the second coming of Jesus Christ or anything like that.
I certainly don't believe that.
And also, if you join and you start talking about how you want to murder ethnic minorities in the streets, you're also going to get kicked. But if you want to just have a chat and talk about politics from a general and perhaps more high-level perspective, you're welcome to join.
Yeah, like closing the borders and stopping Britain being taken over by aliens.
I would chill for people to take a look at where Reform are having their one-day conferences later this year, and if you are interested at all, just go along and see if you can have a chat with people and see what it's about. I think in the UK in politics, certainly at the moment, you don't have a lot of options, and I think they're one of the more credible ones.
Listen, we had no options until Farage came back and revived Reform. So I totally agree with you, John. Your links will be in the description later on. So yeah, and thanks very much for joining us, mate. I've known you for a long time. So yeah, well done, mate. Go on.
Cool. See you all later. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for having me on, I should say.
Most welcome, mate. Anytime. All right, guys. Any final thoughts before we close up? Because we've been going nearly 2.5 hours. So yeah.
I mean,
Mitch,
on that last point, who was it that sort of believed that mid-century German man was like the reincarnation of Odin? It was that.
No idea. I'm not one of those guys. As you well know, like I detest Winston Churchill, but I'm not a Moustache Man fan at all.
It was maybe Mitch. Sorry, did you know who?
I'm assuming it's Tavici Devi because she's kind of like that disposition, but I don't really know too much about post-war Natsok kind of stuff from the top of my head.
No. I remember there was somebody who said that it was like he was like the reincarnation of a Norse god, and that he wasn't really a real human. He was just like this pure kinetic energy. Yeah.
Is that why he let the Russians come all the way to the middle of Europe? Okay then.
Well, yeah.
Yep.
Is that why he did it? Because he was a reincarnation of a Norse god? Yeah, all right. Sorry. Like, he destroyed Germany in the end. Now, he destroyed Germany with a lot of help from the Soviet communists and Winston Churchill and his small hat friends and FDR, for sure. But, you know, there's let him lose all that stuff? I don't think he
I
does.
mean, yeah, he should. You know, my thought on this: he should have carried on to Moscow and not got his ego in the way to focus on
I
Stalingrad.
don't
mean,
think
yeah.
I've never been convinced that the Russians capturing Moscow, sorry, the Germans capturing Moscow in 41 would have ended the war. I've never been convinced of that. But my issue is always that I would have been very happy for the last Russian secret policeman from the KGB and the last SS Panzer Grenadier to kill each other somewhere near Archangel. And as a British guy, I would have stayed out of the war and wouldn't have cared. I would just have stayed out of the war totally, built up the British and Empire forces, and not have cared.
Yeah, fair enough.
Wouldn't have sent them a second-hand pair of British Army boots to the Soviets.
Yeah, fair enough.
Britain couldn't save Poland. There was no chance of Britain saving Poland. Why let Poland declare war for you? It's a flipping, it's a flipping idiot move by any nation.
What I was going to say is, so the reason why we tried to take Stalingrad, they weren't planning on taking Stalingrad, they were planning on taking Baku and the oil fields, because those oil fields were the main reason why the Soviet war machine was able to pretty much do anything really in terms of like motorized warfare and the T-34s and so on. That was the main reason why they had to fight Stalingrad to guard the flank. That would have done more. Taking Baku would have done more damage to the Russian war effort than taking Moscow would have done. Because you take Moscow, but you'll just get the same answer that Napoleon did when he took over.
Yeah, the Russians will move north. They'll move north and east.
Yeah, like the thing about the Russian art of war. The thing about the Russian art of war is that they'll literally fight to the last man. Like that's their philosophy in war. Like when it comes to defending their own country, they'll defend to the last man. They don't really quit. And I think it's the same for other Slavic countries as well. That's their style of warfare. They'll fight to the last man if needs be in defense of their homeland. So there's no way.
I just think that
the Moscow.
I just think the Moustache Man would have ended up in the same situation as Napoleon. There he would have been in Moscow, and the Russian government would have just moved north and east. And what's he going to do?
Well, if you took the oil fields, you can't really wage a war.
Hold on.
Sorry.
I think it was Field Marshal Model who was the one that believed that if Moscow was captured, the entire Soviet structure, the government structure, would collapse.
Yeah,
and
right.
Given, I don't think it was that unlikely, because remember, they'd recently had. I mean, within living memory, you had like White Russia, you had all the breakaway ethnic states that the Bolsheviks recaptured. So I don't know if it was totally unrealistic that there would have been a total fracture.
I really think it was. I think it was.
See, I don't know, because I think the Tsar with Napoleon, it was different because there was aspects of moral unity and again going back into the Russian Empire. And as we know, the Bolsheviks were completely run by largely ethnic minorities within the Russian.
You're not wrong about this, but even in 1941, Stalin, to give him his due, and I detest Stalin. Stalin was a mass murderer long before Moustache Man was, but Stalin, to give him his due, he turned around and said when the invasion started, after he's about a week of being panicked, said, no, we're going to make this about Mother Russia and defending Mother Russia, and we're going to make it a great patriotic war, and we're going to give back our officers their shoulder boards from the Tsarist era and all that stuff. And he did. And do you know what? I reckon Hitler could have captured Moscow in 1941, and the communist government could have moved 500 miles north and east, and it wouldn't have made any difference.
Yeah, I'd say with like the thing about Stalin was able to have moral unity in Russia because the Germans were just retarded in terms of they just antagonized
they
the Russian
destroyed
peasantry.
anyone who was a Slav because the Slavs were Untermesh, and all this sort of nonsense.
Yeah, so there was no prospect of. I mean, but there was a Russian Liberation Army, quote unquote, but that was like 1944 by the time they were actually used on the front lines. And even then, it was just cannon fodder. So there was no prospect of the Russians dumping Stalin. Because I mean, it'd be a different story entirely.
If the Germans could have said, "Okay, we're going to liberate some of these people," which at first many of these people thought they were doing. If they could have actually adopted that, then Germany might have stood a chance.
There was some
never would.
in Germany.
There's a really good document.
Sorry.
There's a very good documentary on YouTube. It's a Russian documentary from probably about over 10 years ago on Operation Barbarossa and the war on the Eastern Front throughout its entire or towards the capture of Berlin. And one thing that's quite interesting is when the Germans had the initial advantage and advanced deep within Russian territory, one of the problems, like Napoleon, that they faced was number one, of course, logistics, but also controlling the territory that they captured. And that's why they relied on Ukrainian and other sort of groups to enforce. And I mean, as we know, what happened is you did have ethnic revenge. And there's that interview that goes round between German veterans on the Eastern Front saying basically there was a lot of the nastiness against the population was unfortunately down to local recruits who were
It was. You're quite right, AR. Listen, because we're just about to close this stream down, let me just say very briefly. First of all, this stream believes in everything Keir Starmer believes in. We believe in everything Keir Starmer says. He's the Führer. We believe in the nation of Israel being a totally great place, and there is no country on earth even close to as important as the nation of Israel. And also, we believe everyone of all races, creeds, and colors is exactly the same, and none of them have higher murder rates than any of us. We are just
we hate pages.
Yeah,
we hate pages.
And we don't have pages, so obviously we're safe. But also, we totally agree on Ukraine is going to win the war. They're going to turn the tide and beat the Russians. Vladimir Putin is one of the most evil men ever been in the world, whilst the what's her name? The woman in America, she should really be the first black female president in American history. She should absolutely win. Orange Man is bad. And all boys should be turned into girls when they're about 12.
Yeah.
I have all these things.
I have a dream that Israel will reconquer the former territories of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So
absolutely. I see Israel being like taking over the whole of Iran, the whole of Egypt. Israel will just take over everything, and that will be good. It will be good. I just see it now.
Straight up, I agree 100% with that view.
Yeah, I also agree with Samson plan. Like, I think if we were in the West,
Samson was a good guy. Yep, he pulled those pillars down, and he was a good bloke. We agree with all this stuff, YouTube. Basically, we are a rainbow channel. So,
Yeah. I was going to say, Billy Crystal's got nothing on us. I mean, he says that he's a Israel supporter. He isn't. He's like pale compared to how big we support Israel. I mean, we literally want to.
I watched a movie where the Little Mermaid was a black girl, and Snow White was a brown girl. And do you know what? That is what we need. We need more of that, because white people are the most evil people in the entire universe.
Yeah,
we really are, and we must just accept this. But anyway, having said that, AI, anything you wanted to plug?
Well, next Tuesday this Tuesday coming, I should say, I'm going to be on Hitman's weekly show, and we're going to be talking about the war on terror.
He did a good video, AI, recently, last week, on Glub's Fate of Empires. That was good.
Yeah, no, great. Do check that out. That's really good. And he Glub sort of goes deep in. It was quite good. You want to learn about the various Arab groups. I think Glub is the only person that's really that I would recommend at this point if you're interested in that. But yeah, we're going to be talking about the war on terror, and I've been doing my bit of research on that, and of course, Israel is the number one bulwark against evil Islamist fascist terrorism, and
just
we
because
support,
they get people's electronic devices to explode in the pockets of women and children, that does not make them terrorists. It really doesn't, because it's Israel, you see. But yeah, Mitch, anything you wanted to plug, mate?
No, not for me. I mean, I'm surprised no one wanted to ask me what the text in my profile pic for this stream was saying or something.
Well, go for it, mate.
It'd probably be my motto if I had like my own dynasty, but it says men of few words are the best men. And it's just the cover of like Henry V.
Good.
But at least a copy I've got happen to have anyway. Don't know why. I just started reading it earlier today for some reason, spontaneously. I don't know why.
Yeah, Henry V was a good guy. I mean, look, when we were talking about the monarch, one of the things we didn't mention, which we kind of should, is that Henry V at Agincourt was risking just as much as his meanest archer, because he was fighting in the front rank.
But I mean, this is one thing.
He had bodyguards, of course he did, and they were some of the best knights, but he was still actually fighting with his sword in the front rank.
Well, what I was going to say, so up until after Ready, that was the standard doctrine regarding kings in
100%.
war. Was that the fact that they had to serve, they fought on foot in the shield war alongside their men, because at the end of the day, there were two main reasons why. First of all, I mean, if the king is not willing to defend his kingdom with a sword and shield, then what's the point of him? But secondly, I believe he humanized the king, so for example, like King Alfred and folklore about it, but also if a king sees what war is truly like, it makes him more just, makes him realize the value of life.
Yes.
And
100%.
I mean,
it grounds him.
I mean, even William at the Hastings, William the Conqueror, I think his half brother Odo were nearly killed on several occasions. There was one point I remember reading in Mark Morris's book. I mean, at one point in Mark Morris's book, there was a point where the Normans panicked because they thought the king, the Duke,
he had to lift his helmet off to show himself to his troops. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, he had to go riding like literally on like the front line and say, "Look, I'm still here. Don't run away," sort of thing.
And also another thing I would say relative to what we were talking about with John Cavalier is that the last time a British king led his forces in battle, I'm pretty sure it was the 1740s.
Yeah,
I think it was the 1740s.
George
Yeah.
II, Battle of Dettingen.
Yeah, he was
That was the last
actually
time.
in charge of his own army. So, good
Was
on George II in that respect.
Was that the Succession War? Was that the war?
Yeah,
of
it was the one
succession?
in between the Spanish War, the War of the Spanish
Austrian
Succession, and the
I think
next
it
one.
was.
Yeah,
It
the
wasn't
Austrian
Battle of the-
Succession. Yeah.
Yeah, Maria Theresa and so on.
Anyway,
Yeah.
gents, thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back next week with the next edition of Splendid Isolation. Thanks to people in the chat for joining us. Please like the stream and do subscribe. I will just briefly check if we have any entropy chats before we go anywhere. At least if my potato over computer works, I will. Who knows? It might work eventually. By the way, guys, this will be the last week, I hope, I'm using this potato of a computer. I should have a new one next week, thanks to a very good friend of mine who is actually an American, I have to tell you. So there you go. Right, no, we don't have any chats on entropy. So, yeah, thanks for joining us, guys. We'll see you next week. Never let the bastards grind you down. And we will be back next week.
Goodbye.
Good night.